At his best friend's wedding.
We were just having a normal night.
I knew something was going on because everything that's been going on was a little sneaky.
To my surprise, there was tons of candles lit and they were all in a row, and Jared was at the very end of that.
I snatched her for a few hours before she had to fly back to work and brought her up to the top of the roof.
He was like, I need to ask you something.
I was so surprised at that point.
I was just like, oh.
And I was like, what? And he was like, will you marry me? And I was like,
and then when he asked me, I was just like, yeah.
I'm in Seattle, where we live. We've been doing this event, Saving Your Marriage Before It Starts.
Right.
And as a result, we get invited to a lot of weddings. I mean, there's barely a week that goes by we don't get invited to a wedding someplace, wouldn't you say?
And we've loved every one of them. They're so individual, they're beautiful, sometimes wacky.
One stands out. Something happened at this wedding we've never, ever forgot. It was years ago, had to do with the ring bearer. He was 3 or 4 years of age, had the little bow tie on, the little white shorts, the little tuxedo, you know. And he was doing the wedding walk, you know, as he's coming down the aisle. And as he get closer to the front of the church, he would stop and he'd pause, and he'd look at the congregation, and he'd go, rawr, rawr. And he was growling at people as he came down, and people, of course, were kind of laughing, and that's kind of unusual. And he stood like a pretty much a perfect
very
gentleman
well
the rest
behaved
of the time,
throughout the ceremony.
Till we had the recessional, then he growled at more people on the way out, and everybody was thinking, what was going on with that? He just kind of stole the show, and everybody was abuzz at the reception afterwards, talking about why was he doing that? Well, 3 or 4 years of age, he had the impression that he was supposed to be the ring bearer. You got it, right? What's a ring bearer anyway, right? If you're 3 or 4 years of age. And Leslie and I left, and by the way, I know that some of you are probably thinking we made that story up. That's happened at 2 different weddings that we've been to.
Exactly.
Right?
Les was actually groomsman in a friend's wedding, and so we flew to Topeka, Kansas, got there just in time for him to try on that rented tuxedo, and the little ring bearer was doing the same thing and had a complete meltdown with his mom, and she discovered he had been expecting to get a bear costume for the wedding because he thought he was the bear.
But we left both those experiences. We said that's a perfect illustration for how your beliefs impact your behavior, right? Whether your beliefs are right or wrong, they're still the fuel for what you do in this relationship that we call marriage.
Yes.
That's how I sound.
When I was a kid,
I thought marriage was gonna be a piece of cake.
a fairy tale.
everything was just gonna be so great till the day you got married, and all you could do is like gaze at each other.
And you just have a bunch of kids and life is perfect.
Everything would fit together just perfectly with minimal to no effort because the stars would align.
Definitely way more to that.
That was a shocker.
Reality check.
So lots of misbeliefs when it comes to marriage, and what are some of the most common that we run into?
Here's one that trips up so many couples because we don't even realize it, but we step into married life believing that we expect the same things from marriage. In other words, that the ideal image that I'm holding in my mind's eye of the perfect marriage, I just assume matches your ideal for the perfect marriage. I mean, you know, I just assume we're on the same page that way. And it doesn't always turn out to be the case because our expectations are shaped by some pretty powerful sort of unconscious forces. We don't know they're there, but they shape our expectations, and they really can stun us then when we get married and it doesn't turn out the way we pictured it.
Yeah, and the first one is what we call unspoken rules, right?
I mean, you don't know you have rules about marriage and the way your marriage should roll out until you get married and your spouse starts to break your rules, right? And then you go, wait a second, you don't do it that way in a great marriage. That's not the way it's supposed to work. And it can be so shocking. Like for me, I remember—
And by the way, these aren't moral rules or ethical.
No.
These are just like unspoken rules about how life should be lived.
I admit that I thought Janae would be more organized.
I thought Art would be a handyman. We still have things that need to be done around the house.
I'm not a handyman. That's what the in-laws are for. My father-in-law's a great handyman. That's who I call.
And I was really hoping that she could help me organize things, and it's hasn't been the case.
Daddy, Art didn't do this. Can you come over and help hook me up? Thanks, Daddy. Oh, I love you.
I'm not mad.
Sometimes we will, though, call them your personal 10 commandments because, not because they're moral or ethical, but because we feel them so deeply inside. It's like they're chiseled in stone in us. That is what a great marriage looks like.
And you can bump into these really soon into your married life together.
6 months in, we celebrated our first Christmas as a married couple. Now, for me, I was delighted. We had moved together to Los Angeles, far from home. My family was in Chicago. I could not have been more thrilled that I was taking him home to celebrate Christmas with my family. And I thought it was quite a privilege for him. I couldn't imagine not having ever celebrated with my family because it was so fun. And so being on a student budget, we caught a red-eye flight, from LA, flew to Chicago, time change, get in wee hours of the morning. I wanted to wake up, though, on Christmas Eve and have all of Christmas roll out together. So I remember as we're falling into bed that night, middle of the night, I'm saying, I'm so excited. We're going to get to wake up tomorrow morning. It's going to be awesome. I knew what that meant. I'm not sure he had any picture
She said,
in his
I'll wake
mind.
you up, and it's going to be a blast. We're going to have this breakfast. That's what we do the day before Christmas at my home and all that kind of stuff. Fine, wake me up.
Fine, he's in a fog. The next morning, I wake up, like 3 hours of sleep, no alarm. I don't need it. My adrenaline's pumping. I'm so excited to be home. Pull on my robe, give Les a little shake. Hey, come on down. It's time for breakfast. And I walk downstairs, and I'm just wrapped up. I melt into that moment where my mom is taking care of me again. I walk in, the house smells just right. Everything's familiar, everything I've had all my life on Christmas Eve breakfast. That was just how my family started it off. So the Christmas china's out, everything's great. My mom's pouring my coffee. We're laughing, catching up, trading stories. I am just in the moment. And everything's done. Les hasn't come down. And so I said, that's okay. Let's gather around the table. I know he's on his way because I woke him up. So we gather and we're well into our meal. My mom pours like my third cup of coffee and it just hits me. Les is missing this whole thing. This is one of my family's special things. So I excuse myself, run upstairs. I think maybe he didn't know you just pull on your, robe or whatever, and he thinks he has to shower. But I walked in, the room's still dark and quiet and still, and I discovered this man sound asleep in that bed. And truly, I cannot tell you how stunned I was in that moment.
I can't tell you how stunned she was in that moment. Because you came over and you shook me again, not so gently.
Wasn't loving.
No, it was not loving at all. And I'm waking up. I've had like 3-4 hours of sleep. I'm waking up and I'm thinking, where am I? And who's this woman? And why is she yelling at me? And she's tearing up and she's saying, you knew this was important to me. I can't believe you're missing the breakfast. Don't you love me? And I'm thinking, my goodness, don't I love you? I just missed a meal. It's not that important, is it? But and the reason I didn't know it was important, did you know it was that important to you until I did that?
No. It never occurred to me.
Yeah. And the reason I didn't know it was important because in my home, we didn't do it that way. In my home, we did it the right way. In my home, we slept in, right? It's the holidays. We'll see you at lunch, dinner, tomorrow, whatever works, right? But that's the power of these unspoken rules. We don't even know they exist until our partner begins to break those,
exactly.
those rules.
And it can be as surprising to us how much we react to that. They take on a power.
I grew up, my parents wanting to go have fun and just do a bunch of activities and events when we go on our vacation. And I found out, especially from our honeymoon, she wanted to do nothing.
Before we got married, I did not realize how being on time was a huge deal to him.
And that's all that she did, because that's what she grew up doing.
It drove him crazy.
I just wanted to go do stuff.
I didn't realize how much time we'd be waiting on Janae to get ready in the mornings.
It definitely took me by surprise.
Yeah, so where do these rules come from? It's not like we sit down and go, I'm going to have a rule about, breakfast before Christmas. Where do they come from? They come from our home, right? The home we grew up in, our family of origin. Even if we resist them, have you ever noticed this? You ever thought to yourself, man, I'm never going to do it the way Dad did it, And then someday down the line, you're going to go, wow, when did I become my dad? Because it just somehow, we call it an introject in psychology. It's a big word, but it's almost a word picture. It's because it's almost like you're getting injected with ways of being from your family of origin, even if you resist them. Let me give you a quick example. I grew up in a home, 2 older brothers, Rich and Raj, and Mom, of course, Dad, myself. Mom was the only female in this family of 5. Anybody grow up in a similar kind of home? All right, so I don't know if your mom was at all like mine, but my mom decided, in spite of having all these men in the house, she was still gonna raise us with a little bit of etiquette, you know? And I can give you so many examples. One stands out. Didn't matter how kind of informal the meal was, just the family around the kitchen table, Mom would never put a bottle of ketchup on the table. Any idea what she'd do with the ketchup? Yeah, she'd put it in a little dish and you would spoon it out. And my pinky goes up whenever I just think about it, you know? And so I thought to myself, you know, Mom, just put the bottle out on the table. It doesn't matter, it's just to us. Oh no, honey, this is the proper way. This is how we're gonna do it. And my brothers would chime in, yeah, Mom, put it out there. And sometimes my dad would try to help out. Laura Lee just put it out there for him. And I can remember saying, because she was always, you know, she'd stick to her guns, but I said as a kid, even out loud, I thought, man, whenever I get my own house, I'm gonna get my own bottle of ketchup, right? I'm gonna get 5 or 6 of them, just leave them all over the place if I want to, right? And I eventually did get my own house. Les and I moved from from Chicago to Los Angeles, moved into this little tiny apartment, that little tiny kitchen. You remember that? You could hardly move around in that thing. But I bet we'd been married less than a week. You'd set the table, we're having hamburgers or something. I came in, right in the middle of this table, big squeezable bottle of Heinz 57 ketchup. How do you think I reacted? What, are you born in a barn? You don't put a naked bottle of ketchup out on the table, right? You put a little dish, you spoon it out. Of course, I didn't want to be that way. My mom made me that way, just like your mom made you certain ways too.
In my home growing up,
when I was growing up,
we ate healthy. My mom cooked a meal at home every night.
You come in the house, you lock the door. It's always got to be locked. We got to be safe.
Now we eat out a lot, which is fine.
It's fine. I grew up in a neighborhood where nobody locked their door. My mom would scream if the door was locked.
I like to eat out when there's nothing ready to eat.
Yeah.
So.
I'm coming home from the grocery store. I'm carrying about 5 bags because I don't want to go back to my car. I go all the way to the door, and to my disbelief, the door was always locked. Charmer. So Jared knows that after work, he's gonna leave it open and I will lock the door. And that's our new rule.
It's always open now.
That's what an interject is all about, and we all have them. That's why we don't even know that rules exist until we get married and our spouse begins to break those rules.
Exactly, and it's such a powerful and unexamined force, but it's not the only force that shapes our expectations, because just like we have unspoken rules, we also have these sort of unconscious role expectations for marriage. Because without even realizing it, every one of us has been hardwired to receive love in some really specific ways. I mean, we don't even realize it, but what happens is we feel most loved when our spouse does very specific behaviors. You know, we've been trained what it looks like to have a very loving husband or be a very loving wife.
And that comes from TV, it comes from the home we grew up in, and all that kind of stuff. Leslie grew up in a home where Dad always opened her doors.
Absolutely.
I mean, like the car door.
And my mom's.
For your mom.
Yeah.
And I think it's wonderful. Any guy do that, like consistently? Okay,
Look
that's
at those
wonderful.
heroes
Fantastic.
out there.
Love that. I just never saw that modeled. I mean, just, you know, but Leslie, like you guys would go to the grocery store just to run an errand.
Yeah.
And her mom would just sit in the front seat and her dad would get out and he would walk all the way around the car, right? And open it, and they'd just sit there and look out the windshield until he did that, you know, and Leslie would be there too. Right?
Indeed.
I mean, it was a colossal waste of time, in my opinion, but I'm not knocking. I think it's wonderful that you do that. I just never saw, Dad never did that for my mom. I mean, he said that's why we got power locks. I mean, why would we take time to do that? And so the first couple of dates Leslie and I went on, you know, I'm halfway to the restaurant, she's still sitting in the car like, all right, I'll get a table, come on when you can, you know. And so that's an unconscious role expectation in your mind. You thought a loving husband will do that.
If you loved me, that's how you would reveal it to me.
Right.
And we have so many of those. You know, we don't realize it, but it can really catch our spouse off guard. They don't know that's the script. They don't know you only feel loved when certain behaviors happen. And they can feel broadsided. Like, I love you deeply. Just because I don't open your doors has nothing to do with how I feel about you. But that's a trigger for you because that was hardwired in you. And that's what an unconscious role expectation.
And that can have to do with how a husband is supposed to think or talk or feel.
For you, one of the ways I devastated you is I don't do maps.
Yes.
Like, I didn't know if you're a loving spouse, you navigate for whoever's driving.
In my home growing up, Mom always helped Dad navigate the trip,
Yeah.
right? And had maps out or whatever. That never occurred
I was
to you.
completely oblivious, cannot read a map. Basically, it's not in my skill set.
Well, I remember once we were in downtown Seattle. We're trying to find this restaurant,
Yes.
and we didn't have a GPS thing in our dash. We're looking, and Leslie said, "I'm going to be a loving wife, man. I'm going to help you find this place." And she has this map out, and I look over, and she says, "This street does not exist in downtown Seattle." And I look over, and I start to laugh. She said, "What are you laughing at?" And I said, "You have a map of Tacoma, Washington, Alex, right?"
It's not going to happen.
No, right?
No.
So unconscious role expectations, we all have them. This
Right.
is what a loving wife does. This is what a loving husband does.
Yeah.
And if they don't line up with our reality, we think, man,
That's right.
maybe I married the wrong person. It can be that powerful.
So it is powerful. Those kind of expectations. I mean, the unspoken rules can be about anything as well. It can be about, what does it mean to be on time? It can be about who's supposed to, manage the home, the
How
car.
do you celebrate birthdays,
Yeah.
Christmas, all
celebrate
the rest?
anything.
Yes,
Yeah.
all right.
So there are moments in every single day when these things are revealed to you as a couple and can really, impact
And you
you.
combine these two, unspoken rules and unconscious role expectations. These are the twin engines that drive this first myth that says we expect the same things from married life.
I always saw my dad doing all the finances. He had his little checkbook out every month, balancing the checkbook, paying all the bills, everything down to the penny. So I always just assumed that when I get married, I'm going to be the man of the house and I'm going to do all the finances and pay the bills and make the budget and everything.
So growing up, family time was like the most important thing. So I don't think John expected that I wanted to hang out with all of my siblings, like constantly.
Turns out when we got married, she's much better at the finance stuff than I am.
Like every day of the week.
You have 7 siblings?
6.
Or 6? Well, it feels like 7.
I was raised by a single mother, and she handled all of the finances and everything. So I was very aware of, it's very money conscious just growing up.
But it's important because we have a big Italian family, and it's nice to hang out with family a lot.
Yeah, like maybe once every 2 weeks or something instead of
That's how
drive
it is
across
for him.
town
That's what he wants,
45 minutes each way. But
And so I just felt like that was just naturally became my role. And thankfully, Jer is okay with that.
And of course, this whole thing gets really personal when you start to do the workbook
Right.
exercises and begin to really flesh it out and you go, whoa, there's some real insight here.
That's right, because that kind of awareness is so curative.
Yes. Good will get better. We're setting ourselves up for a little bit of heartache because there's going to be necessary losses, but that's not the only myth. There's kind of an opposite side of this coin, right? And that's
Exactly.
myth number 3.
Yeah, I mean, the experience of falling in love is so powerful and so positive that it kind of sets us up to think that everything that's been bad about our life so far will now disappear under the power of this amazing experience. And falling in love is amazing, and having companionship is healing, and it's wonderful to share your story with this person. And so in a way, it's a gift, but it does not erase everything that's been disappointing or broken or fragile about your past. You now have a companion, but all of those things come with you into this next chapter. You don't leave them behind, even though it might feel like they've disappeared, because that in-loveness sort of erases them for the moment. You can't be shocked when they sort of creep back into your shared life.
Yeah, we have 2 boys, and when they were little, I remember, there'd be nicks and stuff and writing on the wall that just happens, crayons and stuff. And you came home with something called like the magic.
The Mr. Magic eraser.
And it just like it instantly took that stuff off the walls. I was just like stunned, just with one thing. And sometimes we think marriage is supposed to do that too. It's just going to erase all the stuff we don't like about our lives is somehow magically going to get better. And of course, it doesn't do that.
Yeah, it feels like it's offering us that promise, but it can really catch you off guard when you discover, nope, all of real life is still in the mix, and the gift of this companion to walk through that story.
Now, there's another myth that is probably one of the least articulated and most deeply felt myths of all, and it's the myth that says, my spouse will make me whole. My spouse will make me whole. In other words, this person that I married is going to make up for all the stuff that I've been lacking, and vice versa. Right. And of course, that just can't happen.
That's right. Yeah, because we deeply need that. Sometimes we feel a sense of a gap in our soul, and we're looking for another person to fill that.
So, you know, Leslie and I teach this class at the university in Seattle where we work, and it's called Relationships 101. We love teaching this class, and we'll have about 200 students in there, and we tell them on the very first night of this class that we want to give you a single sentence. Whether you take any notes the rest of the semester, that's up to you, but we want you to write down at least one single sentence. We tell them this sentence that we're about to give you has the potential to revolutionize every relationship you have, whether it's with mom and dad or your siblings or your roommate, your potential soulmate, right? This single sentence, and here it is. It says this: if you try to build intimacy with another person before you've done the difficult work of getting whole on your own, all your relationships become an attempt to complete yourself. Let me say that again. If you try to build intimacy, if you try to build a connection with another person before you've done the difficult work of getting healthy on your own, all your relationships, particularly this relationship, will fall flat. Why? Because nobody was designed to complete you. Sorry to break it to you, but it's the truth. Nobody was designed to make up for all the things that you're lacking.
Yeah, no matter how much they want to do that for you, it's impossible to offer that gift.
Let me do something. I want John and Jennifer, can you guys come up here just for a second? Are you guys engaged, married? Married? All right, stand right here on the front of this stage and stand about a foot apart, okay? And then just, a foot apart, and then just gently lean your shoulders in to each other, keeping still, and then gently put your heads together, all right? And we see a couple like this, and what do we say? Aww, isn't that sweet? All right, you're making us sick, sit down. And that's what we call an A-frame relationship, represented by the capital letter A. In an A-frame relationship, you have two people that look so romantic, and it's almost like
so loving.
Yeah, and they walk around like this. And what happens in a couple like this when you're walking around? And by the way, we see plenty of them on our campus. You see couples walking around like this, and one of them stumbles, figuratively. What happens? Right, the whole relationship falls apart, right? Why? Because there's no individual identity.
Right.
We sometimes call it an enmeshed relationship. It's like they've almost fused their identities.
Yeah, it's just overly dependent. And you don't want that whole thing to collapse, but that's what happens when you're depending on each other for your wholeness.
Exactly. The alternative to that is what we might call an H-frame relationship.
Kind of the opposite extreme.
Yeah, where you have two people that are kind of walking a distance apart, but they're connected at some level. But
not much, because what they're focused on is trying to be whole on their own. So it's kind of like the opposite extreme. And so maybe their lives connect, but there's not a lot of meaningful connection. It's almost like they operate like two parallel tracks of a train. You know, they're headed the same direction, but not a lot of meaningful.
They just don't intersect. And so he gets home and he says, oh, she wouldn't understand my work, so I don't even want to talk about that.
Not going to go into it.
And they just kind of have their own separate worlds. That's the overly dependent, the H-frame.
Yeah, and so it's pretty disconnected. It's not very meaningfully intimate.
The alternative to both of these relationships is what we might call the M-frame relationship, represented by that capital letter M, and figuratively, at least, a couple is holding hands, and as they walk down life's way, if one of them stumbles, the other picks him up, and as iron sharpens iron, they help each other on that pathway to wholeness, but they aren't leaning in on each other, expecting you to make up for everything that I'm lacking.
Yeah, so it's an interdependence because they're meaningfully connected, but they're also strong on their own. And so, you know, it's a great thing because you're not filling gaps, but you are inspiring each other to grow, and you are there for each other in the moments where things unravel.
Right, and the issue with, I want to come back to the A-frame for just a second, because what happens in that M-frame frame, after a while, you don't just lean in on each other, but you start to pound down on each other. This is what you're supposed to do. If you're a loving wife, you should be doing this, right? And that really causes havoc in a relationship.
Because you take that need you feel that's so compelling and you want them to be able to meet that need.
Right.
When we first got married, I was really excited because John's really good with money and just like handling money with budget. So I was like, oh, perfect. I don't have to do this anymore. You can just take care of all the bills. Like, you can worry about the budget.
I'm more of a silent type of person, a silent leader, and not as engaging or, talkative with certain people or, really putting myself out there. And I would say Crystal is more the opposite in that.
I'm the talker. I'm the in-your-face person. I'm going to walk up to you and introduce myself.
But then I realized that I need to actually be good with that, and I need to be wise with how we spend our money.
But I've realized that, that's not fair to her just to always rely on her to do that and to, make those relationships happen and start.
I think you should be really proud of yourself because I think you're doing much better.
Well, there you have it, the myths of marriage. I mean, these are so important because it's those beliefs, right? It's your beliefs that impact the behavior. And so you want to tackle that right at the start. And if you're taking the SYMBIS assessment, you're going to see a whole page that helps you uncover the different role expectations that each of you are bringing in based on your family of origin. It gets real.
We're Chris and Tony, and we just got married.
We met about 1.5 years ago, and Chris proposed to me by surprising me on my family vacation to Maui. It was the best proposal ever.
So after Tony and I got engaged, we talked about how committed we want to be towards our marriage, which is why we decided to take the SYMBIS assessment.
We'd read the book, and we learned about the assessment. It was a no-brainer.
It showed us how our personalities mesh and how we can better leverage ourselves for one another.
It was great to learn about expectations, who's going to do what, and it was really helpful to learn about unspoken rules we had in our families bringing forth into our marriage.
It feels really good knowing that we are doing everything we can to start off our marriage on the right foot.